Good morning. Now, I'm not sure where Jupiter is today, but the victory card, or the Six of Wands, is the Jupiter in Leo card. And of course, it's today's decan. And there's some cool Goetic spirits. We're going to talk about those in reading this book. But anyway, it's a good day to have a victorious card. Good morning. I hope you're doing well. I'm going to read two short chapters from The Key to Solomon's Key, Secrets of Magic and Masonry, or Is This the Lost Symbol of Masonry? Yesterday we talked about Solomon as portrayed in the Bible. And I made the bold but accurate statement that everything we know about King Solomon comes from the Bible or religious literature. That may be an important point as the book goes on. This is chapter 4, Solomon the Magician. And it starts with an epigram, which is a little excerpt from The Fisherman and the Genie. Thereupon quoth the genie, Know that I am one among the heretical Jinn, and I sinned against Solomon. Whereupon the prophet sent his minister to seize me, and this wazir brought me against my will and led me in bonds to him, and he placed me standing before him like a supplicant. When Solomon saw me, he took refuge with Allah and bade me embrace the true faith and obey his behests. But I refused. So, sending for his cucurbite, he shut me up therein and stopped it over with lead. Whereupon he impressed the Most High name and gave his orders to the Jinn, who carried me off and cast me into the midmost ocean. There I abode 100 years, during which I said in my heart, Whoso shall release me, him will I enrich forever and ever. I love shit like that. Solomon is arguably one of the most colorful figures in the Old Testament. But the biblical Solomon is downright dull when compared to Solomon the magician of other traditions. Judaism and Islam seem to meld into a magical mist of fable and fantasy in the person of Solomon. He is at once a Hebrew king, a prophet of Allah, an audacious Oriental wizard. Solomon the magician could talk with animals, fly through the air on a magic carpet, and cause others to fly through the air to him. He could control the powers of nature and was master of the denizens of the spirit world, the demons, the Ifrites, and the genie of the Scheherazad's 1001 Arabian Nights. A recurring theme in these tales is the assertion that Solomon enlisted the service of genii and other maleficent spirits to construct the temple of God. The ancients apparently didn't see any conflict of interest in this arrangement at all. To them, devils, genii, and demons were the spirit representatives of the blind forces of nature that create and destroy everything in the universe. Solomon was God's instrument on earth, and if he could control the infernal spirits to help him build the temple of God, then all power to him. Much like the thundering, smoke-belching heavy equipment used by today's construction workers, these potentially dangerous forces can be instruments of death and destruction when not controlled and directed by higher intelligence. But in the masterful hands of a skilled operator, the same fearful tools can be used for righteous and constructive purposes, including the erection of the house of God. Recall how in 1 Kings, we're told that in order to build the temple, Solomon employed 70,000 men to bear burdens and 80,000 hewers of stones in the mountains and 3,000 overseers of the work. The legendary version is a little more interesting. Here's how Muslim religious historian Sheikh al-Suwiti tells the tale. Quote, when God revealed unto Solomon that he should build him a temple, Solomon assembled all the wisest men, genii, and Afritis of the earth, and the mightiest of devils, and appointed one division of them to build, another to cut blocks and columns from the marble mines, and others to dive into the ocean depths and fetch therefrom pearls and coral. Now, some of these pearls were like ostrich eggs or hen's eggs. So he began to build the temple. The devils cut quarries of jacinth and emerald. Also, the devils made highly polished cemented blocks of marble. Unquote. Excuse me while I have a sip of tea. The Jewish Talmud relates a remarkable story of Solomon's dealings with an archdemon Asmodee in an attempt to procure a magical worm called the shamir. The shamir had power to silently cut through stone with astonishing speed and precision. Although Solomon's control of the elements and his possession of the silent stone cutting shamir were not mentioned directly in the teachings of Masonry, we still hear echoes of the story in the Master's lecture of the third degree. Quote, and please don't think I'm quoting anything secret. These are all monitorial quotes open to the public. Although more than 7 years were occupied in its temple building, yet during the whole term it did not rain in the daytime, but in the night season only, that the workmen might not be obstructed from their labors. We also learn that there was not heard the sound of axe, hammer, or any tool of iron in the house while it was building. Unquote. The concept of a magical partnership between a masterful servant of God and otherwise destructive and evil spirits will shortly become a very important factor in our understanding of Solomon's key. But before we discuss that subject further, we need to take a brief detour through space and time. The place is the lodge room of Lebanon Lodge number 58, ancient, free, and accepted Masons of Columbus, Nebraska. The year is 1962 CE. Chapter 5. A Magical Society of Boys. The epigram is a quote from the Oath of Adimale. I promise that I will be faithful to every trust committed to me, to every promise I shall make so far as humanly possible, and that I will hold ever before me as a glorious example the heroic fidelity of Jacques de Molay, and that of every other martyr who gave his life rather than betray a friend or be false to a trust. When I was 14 years old, I was gently pressured by my father and several of my schoolmates to join the Order of de Molay. Created in 1919 by Frank S. Land, a Kansas City businessman and high-degree Freemason, de Molay is a Masonic organization for young men between the ages of 12 and 21. At first, I thought the whole thing was a little corny and would have much preferred spending my time practicing my guitar and misbehaving. I confess I didn't take much of it seriously. There were, however, certain elements of the experience that appealed to me very much. I loved the feel of the Masonic lodge room. After meetings, when the rest of the boys were in the social hall enjoying refreshments, I would sit alone in the semi-darkness of the temple and try to imagine the secret goings-on of grown-up Masons. The lodge room felt more sacred than church. It was rectangular and smelled like old wood and cigars. There were big thrones positioned in the east, south, and west, and two ornate pillars with globes on their capitals that flanked the double doors in the west. There was an altar in the middle of the floor. It seemed like everything, every chair, every podium, every mounted symbol knew its place and was perfectly situated where it belonged. Is this where the royal secret is revealed? One evening after our chapter meeting, I remained in the lodge room to drink in the atmosphere and daydream about rituals. That night I chose to sit in the big throne in the south. I knew it was an important officer's chair because it was behind an ornate podium that looked like a shortened pillar. On the top of the podium was covered by a square of black marble. For some reason, I felt drawn to rest my hands on the marble and feel its cool heaviness. To my surprise, it moved a little. I stood up and discovered that it was secured to the top of the podium only at one corner, and the whole piece could be moved aside, revealing a secret compartment under the marble top. My heart felt like it was going to explode. As I quickly looked around to make sure I was alone in the lodge room, then I looked inside. There, about 6 inches deep inside, rested a little blue book. I carefully picked it up. There was nothing written on the cover. I opened it up and discovered it was written entirely in a strange code that used Latin letters and symbols. I remember thinking, this is so cool. I debated whether or not I should tell my father of my forbidden discovery. I opted not to, fearing in the back of my mind that he might have to kill me. I was particularly impressed by de Molay's second-degree initiation ceremony. The ritual is really a play staged in the chapter room by the boys themselves. It exemplifies the trial and martyrdom in 1314 of Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, who was burned at the stake in Paris at the hands of the Inquisition. It's a remarkably elaborate drama full of offstage torture and screaming, just the kind of thing adolescent boys enjoy. In a way, the ceremony is a diluted preview of elements of several degrees of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry that treat on the same subject. As presented, the story is a classic example of good versus evil. The noble Grand Master of a band of virtuous knights, resisting an envious and greedy King of France and a corrupt and superstitious Pope. Even though in this case, evil temporarily triumphs over good. De Molay is executed and the order apparently destroyed. Even so, the moral lessons are clear. Our hero remains true to his conscience and loyal to his comrades throughout the ordeals of false accusations, torture, an unjust trial, and finally the stake. The ceremony didn't focus too clearly about what precisely the charges against the Templars and de Molay were. In the ritual, the Master Inquisitor accuses de Molay of being the head of an order that, quote, practiced many abominations, and charges him with 1. Hypocrisy and treachery in conducting the Crusades in the Holy Land. 2. Betraying the King of France, Philippe IV le Bel. Heresy toward the Church. Living in wealth while the poor starved. And conniving with the infidel to make the Crusades fail of their holy purpose. I have to admit I was pretty awed by the whole thing. In my adolescent eyes, Jacques de Molay seemed like a pretty cool guy, and his death was an object lesson in virtue and loyalty, qualities I hoped I'd always be able to emulate. But besides teaching me what I was for, de Molay's story also told me about things I should be against. The forces of intolerance, superstition, and tyranny. After my de Molay initiation, I joined my brothers in the social hall for refreshments and listened to a short talk delivered by our dad. That's the term used for the chapter's adult Masonic supervisor. In this more informal setting, we learned a handful of curious footnotes to the de Molay story. Our dad obviously enjoyed this part of the evening, and he delivered this part of his talk extempore. First, he told us that some Masonic historians believe that Masonry was started by former Knights Templars who fled to Scotland when the order was outlawed. With a most endearing twinkle in his eye, he dramatically hinted that the secrets of the Templars are still hidden in the symbols and rituals of Masonry. He then went on to tell a tale that sounded as if it came right out of a horror movie. It seems that as the coals and flames were roasting him alive, the doomed de Molay uttered a prophetic curse for all to hear. He vowed that within 1 year he would, from beyond the grave or wherever his ashes go, summon the souls of King Philip and Pope Clement to stand with him before the bar of heaven. There de Molay would ask God to judge who was guilty in this matter. And it came to pass that less than a year after that awful utterance, the king and pope did indeed join the martyred Grand Master in the afterlife. I was very impressed. Still, it was pretty strong stuff for a boy of 14 in small-town Nebraska. And I confess I didn't meditate too deeply about de Molay and his comrades until many years later, when the ghosts of the Knights Templar would again ride into my life. This time the focus of my attention would not be upon the death of Jacques de Molay, but the heresies and the abominations that he and his fellow knights were accused of practicing. And that's the end of chapter 5. Tomorrow we'll talk more about the Knights Templar. I hope you've enjoyed these little things here every morning. I have. Let's get on with the week. No Monday night class tonight, but I guess this is the closest as we come to it. Continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Jacques de Molay, thou art avenged.